Well, Alan, welcome to Making Disciples. Thank you so much for giving us time. Now, when I studied theology many years ago, we were using Shaping of Things to Come. That was our key text for mission, and since then, Forgotten Ways, are kind of key books, missional books. So thank you so much for writing those, and you have really influenced those in my generation, particularly around mission and how we can do church differently and that kind of stuff. So thank
Yeah,
you.
it always amazes me, Chris.
Yeah.
Seriously, I think with the Forgotten Ways particularly, I felt that was as much given to me as anything else. I don't feel like, I just had to be faithful to what was given. So it's a great honor.
It's great.
Yeah, so thank you for that.
Yeah. So what I want to talk about this afternoon with you is discipleship, and then we want to move on to some of the work that you've been doing recently. But can I ask you the question, how would you describe discipleship? What is the context of discipleship, or what does discipleship look like?
Actually, I think it's such a big issue because, to be honest, I think very few people, my main work is now in America, but it does extend, back to Australia and, of course, to UK at times, and Europe. I'm amazed at how so few people have a reasonable definition of it, which means it's not clear in our minds. And for me at the moment, living in America, this is a huge issue because I think at the core of what discipleship is this fascination, this adherence to Jesus that lies at the core. And I would argue if it's not that, then what other forces fill that vacuum of what we're becoming? So let me give maybe a broader kind of definition. I would say there's two sides to this Jesus thing. One is the process of becoming more and more and more and more and more like him every year. That is, it's what the Bible calls the process of imitation of Christ. That is, we model our lives upon the life of this person, that we take upon his image upon ourselves. And Paul talks about this, we've been transformed and all that stuff, into his image from one degree of glory to another. This is from the Lord. So the one side is this attachment to Jesus and committing ourselves to becoming more like him. The other side is that Jesus wants to live his life in and through me. So there's a whole kind of intimacy, union with Christ, abiding in Christ thing that goes on with it. Again, a very Jesus-oriented affair. And I just think that without the kind of Christological center, we end up with all visions of discipleship that might be more in the way of a human being trying to assert themselves over other people. If it's not Jesus that's playing that central role as the definitive role for us as disciples, then I like to ask who is. Yeah. And I think it's a scary answer, to be honest.
Yeah. Would you say that we are all being discipled? It's just the question is, what are we doing?
Who's discipling us? Yeah.
Yeah.
So our culture is a profound discipling. For the whole consumerist culture is very much a discipleship thing. They're getting into our habits and rhythms and our patterns and the way we understand ourselves, our self-identity. We're being formed every day without being knowing it. So I think we need to be aware of who's doing the influence on us.
Yeah. And there is also the question, isn't there, about even if discipleship is happening within the church, is it Christ-centered shaping, or is it more religion shaping as well?
Yeah, that's right. For instance, like when I first came to the Lord, discipleship, if there was such a thing in the church that I was involved in, there wasn't really. But what they called discipleship was a 12 or 13-week study. Usually, you'd meet with others, new Christians or new members of the church, and you'd study the heads of doctrine. Funny, it would always end with tithing, which I always think is somewhat weird and ironic. But if it's all about the heads of doctrine, it's all about doctrine but it's optional anyway. You didn't even have to do it. And I would argue that most churches, discipleship is optional, if at all. And most churches suck at it. They don't have clear processes or a culture that really values it. And this is undermining everything else we're seeking to do.
Yeah.
Non-discipleship is a huge problem in the church.
Have you seen a church in recent years where you've thought, those guys, they have got something there, they're living something, they're doing something that is really grasping what it means to be a church that makes disciples?
Yeah, I have. I'm privileged to be able to have seen a few of these. Yeah, I would say so. Do you want names or
Well,
whatever?
don't give names, no, because then it
No,
becomes
yeah.
embarrassing, doesn't it? Because
No,
we'll all
no, there
start
is.
Googling the
But
book.
you know, the thing is, it's so incredibly rare. Most churches are, you can assess most churches by the budget. The allocation of budget says everything, right? The budget is a theological document. That is, it's where we spend our money, where our treasure is, right? So, so most of our budget for most American churches go for the weekend, in the service, and then anything, that kind of enhances that. Mostly it's like big buildings, which are I'm not against this, by the way. I'm just simply saying, 80% of our resources go towards insider-based stuff that really is about entertaining believers. And what you win them with, you win them too, right? So if it's all about high entertainment forms of worship, then you're winning people on that principle. Then you have to keep entertaining them, and then the next week you have to do what you did this week better. Otherwise, they go to the next sexy church that comes down the road. Yeah. So it's really consumerism, But that's where our money goes. A lot of the church's money goes towards that effort, and I think that says a lot about our priorities.
I like that. I've heard you talk before about missional discipleship. Could you talk to me? What is missional discipleship?
Well, it's a pity that we even have to put the word missional in front of it, because discipleship should be a standalone affair. But I think the missional discipleship is maybe a form of discipleship that is committed to growing in engagement in the world, following Jesus into the various places in which he leads us, the marketplaces, in the place where we worship, where we play, where we work, and seeing how we can actually be ways in which Jesus can extend his kingdom through us. I think it's taking the mission side seriously, rather than just Bible study or cell group, kind of very much more passive version of discipleship, if that's discipleship. Yeah.
So what would you say isn't discipleship? If we were to define what is discipleship, is there something you say, well, that isn't discipleship?
Yeah, well, that's a difficult question, because I think everything's discipling us, right? We're being formed in a culture in the church, or in broader culture. We're being discipled by so many other forces. I think Christian discipleship, we can say there's a lot of stuff that we do, or that is not what the Bible would call discipleship. I don't really particularly because I wouldn't put the worship service there, because worship is part of discipleship. It's just that it's missing some pieces in the equation, and it can't form people in the way that it should. In the way, forming people in the way of Christ. So I think that there are things that are inimical to discipleship even. As I've mentioned already, I think this is where the kind of more the celebrity type worship service kind of undermines discipleship, because it creates dependency. And it creates passivity in a church. Most people are observers. A good way of thinking about this is like, if you think about what is an audience in a community and compare the two. An audience is passive. It's critical. In other words, if you're going to a movie, the first thing you do when you come out, what did you think? In other words, you're in a critical stance to it. You're passive, so you're being entertained. You rate it. And it does impact you, but not hugely. I mean, how many movies have we seen? And many don't get us, So that seems to me more like an audience, and it seems to me many churches that we have are more like audiences. They don't engage us in a lifelong commitment to actually becoming like more and more like our Lord, and representing Him more fully. It's all so there's a lot of entertainment going down, and I think it's a problem. It's undermining discipleship.
I have two friends I often talk about. One, I often have things that are broken, technology that needs repairing. And there's one friend I would approach with a piece of technology that was broken. I'd take it round. He would sit there, he would repair it, and I would chat to him. And at the end of it, I'd have no idea how he repaired it, but I know that this thing was repaired. I now have another friend who I take something round that needs repairing, and he says to me, oh, let's do it together. and he's been teaching me how to solder. He's been teaching me how to
Right.
repair stuff.
Yeah.
And I've now got a workbench just here that I now do my own soldering and my own creating
Right.
and making. And I'm just reflecting on, here are two friends, one who has aided me in my learning and apprenticed me in something, and the other that's just left me needing him more. And reflecting on how often is our church practices leaving our congregations needing us more rather than helping them do it themselves. And that's essentially the difference of what you're talking about there, isn't it?
Yeah, no, totally. That's a great metaphor. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really
Yeah.
good. Yeah, that's right. So, like, how do you pass on ideas and form people in a way?
Yeah.
We, it's just not deep within our habit, which is strange to us, isn't it, Chris? I mean, like, it's the Great Commission, which is not an evangelistic commission, right? It's
a
going
movement.
to the world and make disciples of the nations, teaching them to obey. So, how do you teach people to obey? Well, that's not like a sermon. You have to help people to work it out, like your friend does with your soldering.
Yeah, I like that.
Metaphor.
Can we just move it from, not that we're moving from discipleship to mission, because actually this is a part of discipleship. One of the things that I want to help churches do is help people move and understand their discipleship more than just learning things, but actually activating and moving into doing. And I heard you say a number of years ago, and it's really stuck with me, that mission should be as simple as sneezing. The gospel should be sneezed. It should be so simple to share. Could you just walk us through a little bit around some of your thinking around this sneezing of the gospel, sharing of the gospel, how we can help people just be sneezing this thing that they're being apprenticed in, not learning, but being apprenticed in.
Yeah, well, I think I usually use the idea of the movement as being that Jesus sneezed, like Jesus sneezed in Jerusalem, and the virus begins to spread. So really, it's more a metaphor for how we might, see things in a movement that can go to scale and multiply. But the other side is the notion of infectious Christianity. I guess that comes up with the sneezing piece as well, where living in a way that's kind of infecting others with ideas, and particularly with the notion of the gospel, and making life intriguing and communicating in ways that really connect where people are at, rather than simply shouting at them or using kind of formats of the gospel that come from completely different times and eras in church history, trying to kind of be attentive to the issues, the existential and the religious quest going on in our culture, and trying to make the connections there. I think that's more missional forms of evangelism. It's like listening again, listen to your patients. They're telling you the answer. That's the guy who invented the stethoscope, and I believe that's what we have to do. But the idea of infectious again is this idea that something that sounds like good news to people, and it can resonate with them in a deep way. But it takes some listening first before we get there.
Well, can I ask you about some of the work that you've been doing recently? I loved, it was back in January, I was a part of a day that you were teaching here in London, and it really made me go away and think about a few things. I'd love to ask you, what is an apostolic movement? How would you explain an apostolic movement?
So, I mean, I use the word apostolic movement simply to describe movements that have the capacity to multiply and have high impact. So they grow exponentially. They might start small, but they follow a certain logic and a certain pattern, and they usually have huge impact. The early church is one of them. It starts small in the New Testament. At the end of the year 100, apparently, Rodney Stark would say there are only 25,000 Christians in the Roman Empire, which is not huge, by the way. I mean, there's churches in America bigger than that. Talk about infection. But actually, 200 years after that, in year 300, they're up to 20 million people. So how does that happen? And I would argue that apostolic movement is the way it happens, which incorporates this infectious thing, incorporates discipleship, incorporates the centrality of Jesus as Lord and Savior. But, the central message is a simplified, access to God through this particular person, Jesus Christ. It engages in missional forms of evangelism, engages in incarnation, that is going deep into culture and abiding. There's certain patterns that these movements tend to take. that can be actually studied and appropriated in local churches. So I believe it's the form of church that will advance the cause of Christ in the 21st century. The prevailing forms that we've inherited now, pretty done. I mean, I shouldn't have to say that. I mean, but we're in big trouble right across the Western world. And it's not because Jesus isn't, people think well of Jesus. It's not that they think badly of Jesus, and that there's a need for God and spirituality and the search for meaning and significance. These things are real for people. It's just that the church, as we have it now, is not getting the message out. So I believe we have to recover this ancient form, which is our sweetest expression. It's our best expression. We're best behaved when we're in the movement mode. Which uses discipleship. It's very much one of them, by the way. There's 6 factors. I won't go through them now.
That's great.
I would argue 6 factors that have got to come together to create apostolic.
Yeah.
But it can be done and can be appropriated, but we have to think differently about ourselves if we're going to get there.
That's good. Look, one of the other main things I want to talk to you about is APEST. And first, could you explain what APEST is? And then how this thinking can affect the local church?
Well, at the simplest level, APEST is referencing off Ephesians 4, 4:11 particularly, but uses the whole Ephesians 4:1 to 16, which is kind of, focused around the issue of APEST. APEST is simply an acronym for apostles, prophets, evangelists. Shepherds is a better translation than pastor, and then teachers. And the APEST conversation, I mean, following the logic of Paul in that passage, he says this is given to the church in the foundation, in its very founding, which is in the Ascension, which is a founding text, and not insignificant. And the grammar indicates this APEST is given as a whole to the church. As Jesus goes to, rises to the Father, he bequeaths his own identities and purposes, which I believe are APEST, to the church. In other words, the church receives the ministry of Christ in the body of Christ. The body of Christ is the embodiment of Christ, and so there's a correlation between Jesus and the body. And it says that the reason why this is given, that we might attain to, we might become mature, we might attain to the fullness of Christ, that we might perfect, that we might edify. There's a whole lot of words that are used there that indicate that APEST is incredibly important if we want to be a movement that can change the world. And why it's important is because we've inherited, after 2,000 years of Christianity in the Western world, we've inherited an understanding of ministry that believes we only need pastors and teachers. Our orders of ministry are set along that of the pastor and the teacher. But if you want to be a movement, you have to have the kind of ministry and leadership that is able to both initiate and sustain. Pastor and teacher are sustaining forms. They are operative forms. We need the generative form of ministry as well, to both generate new expression and to extend the Christian faith and keep it faithful. And so, believe that these, rightly understood, change everything about the way we understand ministry. Very, very significant conversation.
So can I bring this alongside this conversation around discipleship? So it seems to me that we've moved into a model of church where people turn up to hear the professor teach, and then you're expected to go home and make it happen. And because of the way that we do discipleship in the church, we're actually failing to initiate people into the ministry and the callings that God has given to each member of the church. So essentially we have 2 ministries at the moment, the pastor and the congregation, which is only one ministry. But actually the scriptures talk about these 5 ministries: apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd and teacher. And we are not helping our congregations move into the ministries that they are called to. And it's almost like we've done this to make ourselves as pastors feel more powerful. I have somebody to play with. But if I liberate you into your ministries, then you won't want to come and play with me because you'll be doing your thing. I think there's a whole power thing going on. But go on.
Yeah, no, just saying, I don't think anyone means bad by it. It's just that what we've inherited. Well, of course, So if you've taken the apostolic, but let's just give some quick definitions. I mean, apostolic really, the word apostella means the sent one. In other words, the one who feels most deeply the sentness or the missio or the mission of the church, and therefore is the one most likely to drive the church to its mission, and to do frontier work or pioneering work, which is absolutely critical in our time, because there's a whole lot of new frontiers in the Western context now that need to be evangelized. The prophet is the one who maintains the integrity of the church, faithfulness, loyalty, covenant. Yes, it has to do with vertical, adoration of God. There's worship sides, but it's also social justice stuff as well, because God's concerned with those things. Evangelist is the infectious person, the sneeze of the message, that I guess the marketing department of the church. You need those three to add to the shepherd, which is the one who creates community and defends it, and healthy, wholesome, robust community. It's really good. That's the function of the shepherd. You need it. But you can't only have that. And the teacher, of course, which is the most predominant by far, even above the shepherd, because we're not the most caring people in the world, in spite of the fact that, truthfully, we're not considered that. But we're all about the pulpit and teaching and Bible and theology, and that's really dominant. Now, we need that, but you need the other four as well to be healthy. And so it's really important to think of these as functions of the church, not just people. They are that, but first and foremost as functions of ecclesia that every church needs. Every church needs an apostolic aspect, a missionary function. Every church needs a prophetic function to maintain its connection with God and keep it on track. It's like a radar. Turn off the radar, you hit the mountain, right? So the prophetic is like the radar. You need evangelism, otherwise the church doesn't grow or thrive or doesn't feel right, because evangelism's got a positive vibe on it. It's salvation, man. You need shepherds, to be healthy. You're not going to be healthy. You're going to be fighting. You won't be a community terribly long. And you need teachers to be wise. You need all five. And that's why correction here changes everything.
Okay.
And in terms of discipleship, because I know you want to go down the discipleship track, but I believe that we can create pathways where people can access their particular callings and become mature in them. Not leave it to chance or have to go study elsewhere to kind of get to know who they are. And then you lose them. So the church needs to embrace these functions and also liberate the people into what God has made them to be. God has created people to be this. It's just a permission-giving exercise. It's already given to us. God has already given these to the local church.
Permission given like that. So imagine I'm in a church. Well, I'm in a church, but imagine I have a congregation that just don't think in this way at the moment. They've grown up in a religious world where you just turn up, you do your thing, you go home. How do I, as a church leader, start moving my church into a position where they see themselves as having a part to play in the mission of God and having a role in this? What is the process, or what is the culture I need to be creating to start to shift that?
Oh, that's a big question. I mean, for one, I would, I would start honestly with language. And I'd first of all start with showing how deficient we are in our current expression. And it's been an expression that's been around a long time. So it's deep within our muscle memory and our liturgies, and it's built into that. So we have to show our deficiencies here. And I would just use scripture there. And also just to show, look, if you want to have impact, you want to see people come to the Lord, you're going to have those functions. I would point that out. But then I would say, if I was really starting in a local congregation, I would make sure that among my leaders, at least, we would start on a 6-month learning journey, at least 6 months. Before we go and do preaching series on it, that's the wrong thing to do. And certainly not the first thing to do. I would get people grappling with writing on this matter, everyone reading different material and comparing notes, and making sure that after the end of 6 months, we agree that when we use the word prophetic, this is what we mean. So whatever integrity we have to scripture or to each other, we have come to the conclusion that this is what we mean by it. And then you can begin to learn how to practice it. But I think common language is so important because
it's essentially sticky language, isn't it?
Yes.
Go on.
Sorry, I keep going.
Yeah, no, sticky language. And I think one of the things in the church is the commonality. I think I've heard you say before, one of the problems with the word discipleship is we all have different ideas about what that means. So being able to define discipleship is helpful. In the same way, sticky language around the functions and the roles that people have within the church is really helpful.
Yeah. I think it is sticky. One, it's 5, and 5 is really good. It's kind of magical almost. Everyone can get that. And when you look at the functions, they're not small ideas. They are huge. I mean, apostolicity encompasses a whole lot of function that, of how we extend and impact broadly in society, how we extend the gospel onto new ground. All that stuff about entrepreneurship and innovation that comes up alongside that. That is not a small concept, and we need a lot of education on that. We need formation in that. We need to give permission to those within our congregations that are those people, because they are the gift that God has given to you as a congregation. They're already given. That's actually the language of gifting. It's the language of grace. Paul uses to each one of us, grace has been given as Christ has apportioned it, which means you have to just say everyone's been given this grace, and it turns out to be APEST. The whole church has got APEST, so it's already given to you. You don't have to invent it or kind of incorporate it from elsewhere. It's already given. So I would say you've got to help people discover who they are, who Jesus has made them to be, and then give them pathways for maturity, which is a discipleship issue.
Hey, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for your time. I feel really blessed to have been able to Skype with you. If people want to keep thinking around this APEST, particularly thinking about how this affects their church and how they can start helping their church move in this kind of thinking, where can they go? What can they look at?
Right. So so actually, I'm working with Rich Robinson, of course, who's an Englishman living in Scotland at the moment, and he heads up a thing called 5Q Collective. 5Q is a resource that I've written, and similar to, I would say this. I don't say this lightly. I feel like very similar kind of weight of that book that I felt with Forgotten Ways, that it was given to me, that I'm a custodian of it and I'm meant to pass it on. And I feel that there's so much healing for the church in this stuff, restoration of healthy, wholesome, Jesus-type ministry, that I just feel the obligation to help people get this. So we've established a thing called 5Q Collective. Not only their books and there's resources and application books and that kind of stuff, but there's also coaching, consulting, and online training for people who want it. 5qcentral.com. 5qcentral.com.
Wonderful, that's fantastic. Thank you so much. And I really enjoyed earlier in the year being your warm-up act at IMI, teaching at IMI. Then you followed me, and I think next January we're doing the same. I'm your warm-up act. So when you arrive in Norway next year, it's me that's warmed them up, okay?
Oh, good.
So, don't break them.
No, I just leverage of what you've done there. No, they're lovely people, so
they're amazing.
It's a great honor to serve them too.
Thank you for your time. And
God bless you,
I look forward to speaking to you again at some point in the future. Bless you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Peace, y'all.